things that we do very differently than any other coffee company is that we measure the amount of polyphenols in the coffee, in the green coffee. We work very closely with our farmers to sort of partner with them so that they can make the decisions on a farm level that they wouldn't normally be encouraged to make because there's not a financial incentive to make those decisions.
Hello, everyone. You are now watching the Health First Coffee Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in again today. With me, as always, is the Chief Learning Officer over at Purity Coffee, Ildi Revi. How's it going, Ildi?
Hi. Very excited for this episode.
Thank you so much for joining us, as always. And Ildi isn't the only Purity Coffee team member that we have on the show today. In fact, today's guest is the founder and creator of Purity Coffee. Andrew Salisbury joins us. How's it going, Andrew?
Very good, very good.
Thank you so much for coming on, man. And I want to thank you for dedicating your life and your career to creating the world's healthiest coffee, my favorite coffee. For those who are new here, puritycoffee.com, code HEALTHY. But Andrew, I'd like to talk to you starting from a 30,000 foot view, from a consumer perspective here. You know, it still surprises me a lot that a lot of people think that all coffee is the same. Mm-hmm. The free coffee at the bank, the coffee at the drive-thru, the coffee at the cafe, the grocery stores, like there's variety, but people think that all coffee is created equally. And that couldn't be further from the case. Right. Do you want to talk about why that is, what those differences are, and why the consumer should care about what's going into their morning cup every single day?
Yeah, and I would also say, I mean, this is the same of any food on the planet. I mean, you know, if we eat salmon, is it farm raised, or is it sort of lock salmon, or is it cage salmon, that sort of thing, or is it if you eat beef, is it farm raised, is it grass fed? So I mean, there needs to be a distinction between different levels of food because, and the coffee industry has already made this distinction, but they've used it with a lens of taste. So the lens of taste for specialty coffee means that we're focused just on the taste of the coffee. But the reality is there is just 100 of little micro decisions that are made from producing the coffee to roasting the coffee. And if you only use the lens of taste, then you're going to make different decisions. And if you are focused just on taste, those decisions will maximize the quality of the taste of the coffee. It won't be focusing on the health benefits of the coffee. So what Ildi has done in her book about circular health coffee is, where does specialty coffee end and where does health-based coffee begin?
Oh, that's a great distinction. And you're right. Historically, consumers have chosen their coffee based off of two things: taste and price. Mm-hmm. And you guys, you know, Purity Coffee largely redefined the industry, and you guys introduced the factor of health to the consumer. So let me ask you, Andrew, what actually makes a healthy coffee healthy?
Well, probably this is the most important point. And if there's only one takeaway that you leave from this podcast, it should be this, which is that the absence of bad stuff does not create something which is healthy. So absolutely, we should make sure that our coffee is organic. Absolutely, it should be mold and mycotoxin free. It should be tested for heavy metals. But the health benefits don't come from that. And we have to stop having that conversation about avoiding the bad stuff. Absolutely, let's avoid the bad stuff. But let's maximize the positive compounds. So the positive compounds are the polyphenols, the antioxidants in the coffee, and they can be destroyed or created and based on the way that the coffee is processed and also the way the coffee is roasted. So all of the health benefits, when you talk about, you know, the health benefits of liver disease, every cup of coffee from the baseline has a 20% lower chance of you ever developing liver disease, fatty liver, liver cirrhosis, incredible sort of like studies around the impact of the liver, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, 6 forms of cancer. It's an incredibly healthy food. It can be an incredibly healthy food. Yes, we want to avoid the bad stuff, but that's not where the health benefits come from. If you're not measuring and sourcing for and roasting for polyphenols and antioxidants, you're missing the game. Of course, we want to avoid the bad stuff, but that's just table stakes. That's the bare minimum.
That's really well said. And, you know, it really gives credence to how coffee is a alchemical powerhouse. Its ability to create this wide variety of health beneficial compounds is really second to none. Andrew, do you want to talk about a few of those compounds? And I know this is kind of a strange question, but Do you have one of those compounds that's like near and dear to your heart, that's your favorite, that you'd like to talk about on the air?
I mean, I think the most important compound, and this isn't just the perspective of purity, this is the perspective of over 20,000 studies that have been done on the performance of coffee when it relates to health. And that is the chlorogenic acids. The health benefits come from the antioxidants. So coffee contains caffeine, obviously. And a lot of the reason why people drink coffee is because they like the feeling that the caffeine gives them. But the health benefits don't particularly come from the caffeine. It can be a sort of like it can be an aid, but the reality is the chlorogenic acids. It's I think 11 types. Is that right, LD? 11.
Well, we measure 11 types, but there are dozens, and there's some scientists who think there are hundreds of types of chlorogenic acids.
Yeah. And the bottom line is if you don't look at coffee through the lens of health, you don't focus on the antioxidants and the polyphenols in coffee. And so you're not sourcing and roasting for those polyphenols. And so I believe, I'd love to find out there's other companies who are doing the same thing, but I believe we're the only coffee company in the world that has got 8 years, 10 years of data that has measured coffee and the antioxidants in coffee. And we're constantly trying to improve that as from the baseline.
I like pointing out that coffee is more than just caffeine, because people just treat it as a caffeine fix. But there are a lot of people who can't have caffeine. And sometimes doctors tell people not to drink coffee, and it's purely because of the caffeine. But they're missing out on all the healthy decafs that can be out there where the caffeine is reduced to almost nothing, and they still get these health compounds.
And I would say this one thing. I mean, there's a lot of good intentions out there where people are saying that they're experts in certain areas, and there's a lot of advice over coffee. And it still amazes me that there's still people who talk about that coffee isn't good for you. The reality is this is settled science. There's 20,000 studies that have been done on the health benefits of coffee. A lot of them are peer reviewed. A lot of them are million plus people in these studies. So they're huge longitudinal studies. They're very well supported. They're university studies, they're peer-reviewed studies that show the health benefits of coffee. Now, are there certain compounds inside of coffee that we want to minimize? Absolutely. Are there certain compounds we want to maximize? But let's not sort of have a broad stroke, which is that coffee is either good for you or bad for you. It really depends. And it depends on whether the company is maximizing the positive compounds and paying attention to make sure the negative compounds are not there. But again, it's not about the negative compounds. That is table stakes. Everybody should demand that the quality of their food and all of their food doesn't have mold and mycotoxins. And one of my pet peeves is this. When we first looked at Purity Coffee and we looked at every decision based on health, the easiest decision that we made as a company was to say we're going to buy organic coffee, make sure it's not treated with pesticides and fertilizers and that sort of thing. We're going to test for heavy metals and we're going to test for mold and mycotoxins. A whole container of coffee costs around $300 to sample test it to make sure that it's free of mycotoxins. It is not an expensive thing. Every consumer should be demanding that. That is a low bar. We should move on from this conversation about whether your coffee has mycotoxins or not and focus on really where the health benefits come from, which are the antioxidants and the polyphenols and how many polyphenols end up in your cup. And that's a much more interesting conversation. Let's move off the table stakes, which is just sort of like mold-free organic coffee. Of course, absolutely.
This is exactly what this podcast is about, is we really want to dig into the details of what makes coffee healthy and different coffees healthy.
You guys are always pushing the envelope at Purity, which is what I really love and respect, Andrew. And can you talk about how you guys settled on your current approach? It is evolved over time organically, and I just love what you guys have done. Can you talk about the Purity process?
Our process is simple, though not necessarily easy. Our North Star has always been every decision based on health without compromise. So some of those decisions are really easy. There was nobody that was telling us that you really need to have your coffee treated with effectively poisons. Nobody was telling us that. So that was a 5-minute decision. That was a very easy decision. Same thing with mold, mycotoxins, that sort of thing. What became more complex is understanding where the polyphenols are created in the sourcing of coffee and also in the roasting of coffee. So the things that we do very differently than any other coffee company is that we measure the amount of polyphenols in the coffee, in the green coffee. We work very closely with our farmers to sort of partner with them so that they can make the decisions on a farm level that they wouldn't normally be encouraged to make because there's not a financial incentive to make those decisions. We ask the farmers to farm in a way that's good for the environment, that's also good for polyphenols and antioxidants in the coffee. We lab test them and we pay them a premium for doing the sort of work that they wouldn't normally be encouraged to do. And that's how we've got such a great network of farmers who collaborate with us, where we're basically trading best practices. We're understanding what we can do on a soil level, what we can do on a cultivar level to improve the quality of coffee for health based on antioxidants. So when I say it's simple in the sense that, we just follow one basic rule, but some of the things that we do are complex. Like, for example, in the roasting curve, most people, take green coffee and turn it brown and make it taste good. Our goal is to maximize the curve so we keep the most antioxidants in the coffee. So the way that this thing works when you roast coffee is that you roast away a lot of the polyphenols. So a very dark roasted coffee has a lot less polyphenols than a light roasted coffee. But the problem is in the roast, you can create negative compounds and you have to pay attention to the positive compounds. So we design a roast curve to keep the antioxidants in the coffee where we're not creating any negative compounds on the front end, like acrylamide, or any negative compounds on the back end, like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, and we're maximizing the antioxidants and the polyphenols in coffee. So just focusing on what is the content in the coffee as you roast the coffee makes a huge difference. And as far as I know, we're the only coffee company that focuses on that.
Well, I want to drill down on one thing you said there, because your relationship with the farmers, I think, is really what a lot of this stems from. And it reflects what I've challenged a lot of our listeners to do, Andrew, which is to become more familiar and become more curious about how your coffee got to your cup. And you guys have done a really good job of that by really integrating yourself and forming these relationships with cultivators. In fact, the farmers like Francisco and Oscar. What was that like? And how did that kind of change your perspective to go and see these regenerative farmers in action?
I think, the first sort of starting point is that the farmers are professional. They want to do a great job. But if they're motivated to make business decisions just based on taste, if that is the only lens, they often have to forego some of the practices that they know would produce better quality coffee for health. And that's just a business decision. And so one of the first things that we did is we worked with the farmers to say, we really value this. We're going to measure it. We value it. We value what you're doing. And we gave them a free rein to effectively make the decisions they need to do on a farm level to improve the quality of coffee for health and also the way that the coffee is grown for the environment. So, shade grown is a great example of that. The problem with industrial farming is it gives you better yields, right? So there's rows and rows of coffee trees that are harvested by machines. They give better yields. They involve less people. Financially, there is a reason to make those decisions. But the very best coffee when it comes for health is grown in shade-grown environments where there's rich soil content and there's microbes in the soil. And so what we have to do is, and a lot of our farmers are doing this already, is encourage them to farm in a way that maximizes those quality compounds. And measuring those things along the way is hugely important, because if you don't measure it, you have no idea whether what you're doing on a farm level is going to end up in the cup. And so measurement is super important. And that's one of the reasons why we've decided to be very transparent from the early days. And Ildy's book, all about circular health coffee, lays bare everything about what we do differently with coffee for health versus specialty coffee. And so, it's important, I think, that we move the conversation, elevate the conversation up where people understand that we need to measure, we need to understand what impact all these local decisions are having, and we need to sort of focus on the quality of coffee in the cup as it relates to health with a new lens.
That's fantastic, Andrew. And I'd like to pose this next question to Ildy, because what you're highlighting there is really incredible, which is, in the beginning of this, you guys were testing to see which coffees were highest in these beneficial compounds and testing to see what makes coffee healthy. And now, of course, in hindsight, it's 2020, you follow these principles You follow nature's guideline. You grow in a living soil. You encourage microbial life. You encourage the communities around you. And then magically, that's the healthiest coffee. But you didn't know that going into that, did you, Ildi? You were testing these coffees and kind of hoping that was the case. Was that kind of a lock and key magic moment when you're like, wow, a lot of these regenerative farms are producing the highest levels of chlorogenic acids? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it was Andrew who got me aware that coffee could be healthier. I'd been in the industry for, 15 years at that point, more, and I didn't even consider it. And what's interesting is the producers that we're talking about here. We interviewed Francisco for this podcast. People will hear from him. But for him, health of his food product, of his coffee, was essential, was his motivation. Same with Oscar. And as we bring on more producers and they become aware of the health benefits of coffee, they're eager to ask us, what can I do to make this healthier? And it was Andrew who got us hooked on biochar. What was that, about 5 years ago? You're like, there's this thing called biochar. And Oscar said, God, I was doing that under the table. I thought it was something wrong. But then as soon as we said, no, go for it, he went for it. And, Andrew mentioned the yields of synthetic inputs. Yes, they're sort of like a fast cheat into yields, but Oscar is getting the same yields using organic regenerative methods. I think one of the things I've learned, to answer your question, is that synthetic inputs as a shortcut do not contain the complexity that the soil and the plants need from the nutrients and nutrition that is produced when you grow the coffee organically. And regenerative, there's a sort of debate on what that is, but I like to attach organic in front of regenerative, because for us that's primary. But as Andrew, maybe you can talk about this, just because it's organic doesn't mean it's got all the health compounds in it.
Yep. That's a very good point. I mean, it's just one of the many things that you need to focus on. So organic is a starting point, just like mold-free, mycotoxin-free is a starting point. It's a very bare minimum, but by itself, it's not sufficient. I think the product I'm most proud of in terms of like what we've done as a company is Protect. The reason why I'm most proud of that is because I think that there is a real possibility that companies can focus on the health benefits of coffee in specific areas. So, for example, Protect, we've dialed up the amount of antioxidants. We've got a very high polyphenol coffee. It's a lighter roast coffee, so we've retained the antioxidants. We've followed the science. One of the biggest sort of studies that have been done on coffee and health is around the liver. One of the most sort of incontrovertible sort of evidence around the health benefits of coffee is the liver. And so people who are drinking alcohol, people who are in recovery centers, should be drinking a lot of coffee because of the damage they've done for the liver. So the reason why I'm proud of this particular product is because we've focused on the science, and we've maximized the compounds that science tells us we need to maximize in the roast curve. And I think that there's going to be an evolution. I think there's going to be a coffee for the hearts. I think there's going to be a coffee for type 2 diabetes. I think there are certain compounds that we should pay attention to. And given that, the starting point for all of these coffees needs to be mold-free, organic, specialty grade, that sort of thing. I mean, that's the starting point, but that really is the starting point. That is the launching pad that says, okay, now we've got the low bar, let's go on to the other thing and have a more sort of interesting conversation. And that's where I think, I would love to go with this, is like, the things that we do above and beyond what specialty coffee does, and what the people who are just saying that healthy coffee is the absence of bad stuff.
My goodness, though, Andrew, when you talk about these disease prevention blends and you take a look at the studies, how efficacious it can be in preventing diabetes and Parkinson's, this is important stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I know we're talking about coffee here, yeah, but if you have a history of this, or you got a grandma who's going through listen, if you're drinking this brew every single day, it can either be a huge disease preventative, Or if it's produced incorrectly, it can actually be harmful to your health. It's a double-edged sword. And if you're drinking it every single day, you need to take that into account. If you have coffee a couple times a year, hey, then maybe it's a little bit different, but you're putting this substance into your body every day. And it could be the difference between preventing a serious illness or maybe even creating one.
That was the biggest aha moment. The history of Purity is that my wife was having some health issues and she didn't want to give up her coffee. And as a tea drinker, I was saying, okay, fine, I'm going to go and sort of like source the evidence. And so I took two professors from the Institute of Coffee Studies out for dinner, and they explained all the health benefits of coffee. And I was the first sort of moment I was really amazed. I was amazed that there was all these health benefits in terms of liver disease, prevention of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, 6 forms of cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, and this is something that people are doing every single day. So to your point, this is not encouraging somebody to take wheatgrass or to do more ice baths or do something that they don't normally do. This is saying, if you're a coffee drinker, you probably drink a couple of cups of coffee each and every day, and you'll probably do that for the rest of your life. Paying attention to the quality of what you consume every single day is super important, and so it's worthy. It means that it has a huge impact. I mean, for multiple reasons. One, coffee is incredibly healthy for you. It has a huge impact on your overall health and longevity, and at the same time, it's something you do every single day. So we really encourage people. This feels like an area where just a small amount of concentration can have a huge amount of dividends in terms of sort of like, the health benefits of a particular product.
Absolutely. And avoiding the bad stuff as well, because like I said, it's a double-edged sword. You have a healthy coffee that prevents Parkinson's, and then you've also got coffee that may have been treated with ivermectin or some other pesticide that contributes to Parkinson's. And what I want to kind of highlight, Andrew, is you guys are doing the good work. I've been to the farms. I've been in the meetings with you, and they're really trying their best out there. No one's trying to skirt anything or cheat any guidelines. They were using real regenerative practices in lieu of these harmful fertilizers and pesticides. And that's important stuff, Andrew. That's world-changing stuff, in my
Uh,
opinion.
I'm very proud of our partner farmers. They're doing an amazing job. I mean, the quality of their products is fantastic, and they're always bringing us innovations because they understand the direction that we're going in. So one of the things we've done, and one of the things I'm most proud of, is that we've got over 65,000 testimonials on our site at a 4.9 star rating, which is unheard of in the coffee industry. So our consumers recognize what we're doing in their body, and so that's the reason why they would leave testimonials. They would talk about the way the coffee makes them feel. But this is all based on the fact that what we're doing on a farm level is translating to the cup. And so what we tried to do is we also send those testimonials to the farmers so they can understand what the real impact is of the work that they're doing. So, Mildred and Oscar's farm, and, that they receive the testimonials they know for these particular blends of coffee, so they know what the real world impact is, because a lot of farmers don't actually understand what the impact outside of Purity, understand what the impact is of their product. And we want our farmers to understand that they're doing something meaningful.
What we have done over the years is realize the circular nature of this entire product, how everything that we put into the product and every part of the production is part of the health. And it's not just the product, but the people producing it. So that's what we've evolved to over the years.
Mm-hmm. Following those core principles, the principles of nature, the principles of permaculture, it pays off in the end.
And that, it's also worth mentioning that this is sort of a different way of looking at coffee, and it's a new model. And so what Illy's talking about circular health coffee is there is a model, instead of being extractive, which is, the model, the way that it works today in the coffee industry is very much a fixed pie. So it's mentally is we're going to charge this amount for our coffee and the pie is fixed. So therefore, the least money we can pay the farmers, the more money we can take as a margin. And that is an awful way of thinking. And so what I think we're doing as a company is we're showing that you don't have to have an extractive model. You can have a model where you can actually pay the farmers often two times plus what they would normally get in terms of coffee costs for farming in a way that's good for coffee and good for the environment, that the environment benefits, that the consumer benefits because they get a better quality coffee that they can actually recognize as a better quality coffee for their health. So it's circular health. It's an upward spiral. It's the fact that every stakeholder can benefit from a system like this, and everybody wins.
It's an upward spiral reflected in the logo.
Yeah.
Andrew, what's next for Purity? Anything that you can tease for our listeners today?
There's a lot of things, a lot of areas that we're working on, but I would say that the area that I'm most interested in is the fact that coffee can be an incredible vehicle to tell a story. In particular, we're working with a number of Amazonian tribes. We're working with sacred cups, which is the idea of how you can bring the sacred cups is almost like a specialty, a premium grade of Purity Coffee, and it delivers something that we can't do just by Purity Coffee, which is that there's a lot of people who are producing coffee in a way that's really good for the environment, but they're relatively small and that they can't get certified organic. So we lab test and we make sure that they're not using pesticides and herbicides or anything else like that. But at the same time, they're selling their coffee. This is the problem. They're selling the coffee to a middleman. And that middleman means that they don't get a premium for quality coffee. And you as the consumer don't actually get to benefit from drinking this amazing coffee. So what we want to do is we want to create a system to bring amazing coffee to consumers at the same time, highlighting the story of these indigenous communities and these Amazonian communities that are doing a fantastic job. And, I think that's an upward spiral. I mean, I think that the very fact that we can bring that story to life to consumers in a cup of coffee so they recognize, okay, this is meaningful, it has a meaningful impact on the farm level and a meaningful impact on the consumer level.
I can't wait to see what you guys have in store. The Amazonian coffee sounds absolutely incredible. And that's what I really want to call upon the listeners to do today, is to take that extra step and have that curiosity to really understand what it is that goes into this cup that we're digesting every single day. So, Andrew, any final thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
I would just say that, what you were talking about earlier, I mean, I think every consumer has to make a decision about whether something is worthy or not, whether they want to spend time and effort and ultimately money on paying a premium for the work that is done by any company, for any product. And what we've tried to do is really be very transparent, and we've really tried to focus on the things that really matter when it comes to the quality of coffee for health. So, I mean, avoiding the bad stuff, but maximizing the good stuff. Please feel free to dig deep in our site, in our lab results, and really understand what we're doing differently and why it matters to you. Because I feel really strongly that if everybody could get rid of their sodas and start drinking great quality coffee for health, I mean, the world would change. I mean, so it is a worthy, important initiative, and I think people should pay attention to the things that they do every single day.
And I'll guarantee you, if you try Purity and you stick just to Purity, you will feel a difference. So it's puritycoffee.com, code HEALTHY if you're a fan of this show. That'll give you some savings. And thank you, Andrew, so much for stopping by the podcast. This was an awesome episode. We can't wait to have you back on again.
Great. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
As always, thank you, Ildi. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Jordan. This has been fun.
And thank you, dear listener. Stay tuned. That's all for today. Make sure you hit subscribe. Share this episode with somebody who could use this type of information. We love when you share the show. That's all for now. This is Ildi Revi, Andrew Salisbury, and Jordan River signing off saying have an extraordinary rest of your day. We'll see you next time on the Health First Coffee Podcast.